Welcome everyone to theScore Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host Justin Boone, the lead fantasy analyst at theScore, and today's episode is presented by Subway, who now deliver so you can get back to the game. Today we are previewing Week 7. We got a bunch of real life trades we got to talk about, how that's going to impact the fantasy landscape. We're also going to talk about running back handcuffs and the undefeated 49ers team and the Jets. Now that they have Sam Darnold back, it's like a whole different team, and a bunch more stuff, including the players that we think are being overlooked going into Week 7 here. But I want to bring on my guest first, one of the brightest minds in the fantasy industry. We've had him on before. It's round 2. Elliot Christ of the Quant Edge. You can find him on Twitter at Elliot Christ. Elliot, welcome back, man.
I'm pumped to be here. Thanks for having me, Justin.
Well, the last couple weeks, I don't know if you've been listening, but what we've been doing off the top is I've been asking on Twitter to see what everyone's biggest fantasy question is heading into that week. And it's not start-sit stuff. I want big picture kind of questions, the stuff that's going to help people win fantasy titles. And we got a lot of great questions again this week. And oddly enough, a bunch of them were about Kareem Hunt. I didn't realize that so many people were that concerned about Kareem Hunt coming back. I mean, before the season, I said my thoughts on it, and I think Nick Chubb was going to be just fine. I thought he had a half a year here to show everybody how good he was, and he's done exactly that. So I'm not that concerned about Kareem Hunt, other than the fact that he is a pretty good handcuff once he gets back in Week 10 here. But I want to read a couple of the questions, and then we'll see if we can help fantasy owners here. So at Steve Park 28 asks, best RB stash for week 14 to 16 of the playoffs. So many to choose from. At Matter_ongoing also wants to know who are the best playoff stashes. And at Ralph Pickles, when is the right time to handcuff your studs? Should the Chubb owner spend big to get Hunt? That's one of those Hunt questions that I mentioned there. But Elliot, I don't know about you. Generally for me, I think this is a little bit early to be focused on specifically handcuffs for the fantasy playoffs, but this is around the time of year as bye weeks start to go by that you want to start to fill up your bench spots with as many of those high upside backup running backs as you can. So let's just start off by, I want to know, what's your strategy? How do you approach handcuff running backs in redraft leagues?
Yeah, I mean, the type of running back I'm always looking for the handcuff is if the guy ahead of him goes down, does he become a workhorse back? And if the guy ahead of him does not go down, does he have any standalone value? So a perfect example would be like Chase Edmonds, right? If something happens to David Johnson, Chase Edmonds can be a league-winning type player. And if nothing happens to David Johnson and you get injured someplace else, you can start Chase Edmonds and have a hope and a prayer on his 30% snap share, catching a couple passes, still being involved in the offense. So what I don't want is the guy who right now plays 10% of the snaps behind a back, and if an injury happens, is going to have a 2 or 3 back timeshare and be a nightmare to roster.
And I think there's a couple of those likely timeshares, in my opinion, out there now. I mean, Malcolm Brown and Darrell Henderson. We like what we saw from Henderson last week. I think if Todd Gurley's out again, probably going to turn into a little bit more of a share there. Gus Edwards, Justice Hill's another one that comes to mind. Those guys, I think if Mark Ingram goes down, we're going to see both those guys involved. And the Colts as well. I talked a lot about wanting to get the backup running back in the Colts offense just because how good that line is. But that one also kind of looks like it's going to be a timeshare if Marlon Mack ever missed any games. So do you have a list of some of the backs maybe that you're looking at other than Chase Edmonds, who we've seen actually play pretty well the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you just said. I think it's cheating if I start with Austin Eckler, right? I know he's rostered on everybody's, but I would say that he's the ultimate handcuff running back right now, just based on his early season performance. And
for sure.
A couple that pop to mind is like Raquel Armstead of the Jaguars. Fournette's playing we call him in chat Fat Christian McCaffrey, because he's playing basically 100% of the snaps. The only time he comes out of the game is when he's tired after a long run, or in Denver where the altitude beat him up a little bit. And Armstead should see about 70% of the carries. They actually like him a bit there. Gio Bernard is a guy that if something happens to Joe Mixon, could have a monster role. We've seen that before with the 75% snap share. And even last week, he saw 48% of the snaps. So Bernard's a guy that has a bit of a role right now. And if something happens to Mixon, is an excellent pass catcher. And that bad offensive line wouldn't concern me too much. I mean, Mattinson of the Vikings, I think, could have a monster role.
Definitely.
Jamal Williams could have a monster role, and we saw him look a lot better, but he's definitely rostered right now. I just want to kind of throw out a couple names. But those are the first guys that pop into my head. And if something happened to Le'Veon Bell, I think Ty Montgomery could be, a huge play as well, because they really liked him coming into the season. He got a little bit more involved last week and is a talented receiver out of the backfield.
My only concern with Montgomery, though, is every time we've gotten excited about him, whenever he's going to get those starter snaps, it seems like he breaks down himself. And I don't know that he'd be able to sustain it, but for a game or two, if he gets in there, I definitely agree with you, especially with how good that Jets offense looked last week. But we'll get to that a little bit later. I'll throw out a couple more here. Tony Pollard was one that we were really excited about at the start of the year. We thought he might get a couple games if Zeke was going to hold out, and then Zeke came back. But we saw Pollard go over 100 yards against Miami, so we know he can perform behind that line. Latavius Murray looks like he's going to get his shot this week. These are guys that I think should be owned in most leagues already, but I'll throw them out there. Hunt, who we talked about earlier, I think he's a pretty good one, just in case he gets the starting job later in the season if Chubb gets hurt. Rashad Penny, too, he really fumbled away his opportunity to get a chance at starting when Chris Carson was almost fumbling away the job itself. But Penny's still there. He's dealing with these hamstring issues on and off. But if he ends up healthy and Carson either gets fumbleitis again or ends up getting hurt, I think Penny could be a league winner there. And I like that you mentioned Raekwon Armstead. I think there's a couple guys like Armstead that aren't talked about enough because they aren't really household names yet. Like we're seeing some of these guys like Madison and Pollard. They got a lot of hype coming into the season. But when you look at Armstead, Reggie Bonnafon with the Panthers, we know Christian McCaffrey has proved himself. Last year, he handled the crazy workload and he made it through the season. This year, looks like he's doing it again. They're on their bye this week. He's going to have a chance to get even healthier for the stretch run. But we saw Bonnafon flash. And if McCaffrey went down, seems like he's pretty much the clear backup there and would step into a pretty nice role. Like you're talking about with a guy like Chase Edmonds, Bonnafon might be the poor man's Chase Edmonds in that one. And then when you're talking about timeshares, just right now timeshares, like you mentioned Eckler has value right now as a flex, maybe even as a low-end RB2. And if Gordon went down, would be that RB1 again. Jamal Williams is like that. Miles Sanders, I think, is like that. Don't really love what he's doing between the tackles right now, but if Jordan Howard was moved out of the way, Sanders would get a pretty big workload there. And Royce Freeman's a guy that just had some bad luck, not really scoring touchdowns, but he's getting a ton of work in that offense, and they're a timeshare right now. But once again, not a real handcuff, but a guy who his value would rise astronomically if Phillip Lindsay were sidelined.
Yeah, I think one of the really difficult things about this question is not understanding the league, right? Because there are 8-team leagues, 10-team leagues, 14-team leagues, whatever it is. There's teams, I've played in leagues where there's, 4 bench spots, and I've played in league where there's 10 bench spots.
Yep.
So, a guy like Freeman in an 8-team league with 4 bench spots is probably available. But a guy like Bonnafon is like a 14-team league kind of guy where you're just hoping that something happens to McCaffrey and he can hold you down. I mean, that's really what we're looking at. But going back to the Kareem Hunt thing, I'm very much with you. I think they already said he's going to be more of a change of pace back. Now, if something happens to Chubb, Hunt could be, an excellent play. We know he's a great NFL player. The off the field stuff is, its own issue when it comes to fantasy. But I'm not spending like all my waiver wire money on Kareem Hunt if nothing's wrong with Nick Chubb. I'll let someone else go crazy for him and spend much less money on guys like Armstead and Bonnafon and Madison potentially, like that. I'm going to be able to save all my fab in case someone does get hurt and there is a guy on the waiver wires and, I didn't blow it all on Kareem Hunt hoping that something happens to Nick Chubb.
Absolutely. That is all for the video version of today's podcast. Big thanks to everybody out there for watching and for providing all the questions. I'll try to get on Twitter tonight and through the week and answer as many of them as I can. If you want to listen to the full Week 7 preview pod with Elliot and I, you can find it on the theScore app or on whatever podcast platform you're using. Thanks for watching.
Said leave on time, my baby said leave on time.